with the next piece of the capsule wardrobe project. And so far I have finished the burgundy corduroy dress and the green cloak. And next up I'm going to be tackling the blue jumper dress. I have this fabric here, I believe is a wool blend. But yeah, basically I don't have much else to say other than I'm going to be making a dress from this fabric. It is currently Thursday at around 11 a.m. and, excuse me sir, and I have a event thing that I want to wear this to on Saturday, so here's hoping that like a day and a half is enough time to finish this dress. And I can't end my intro now. It's illegal to move a cat that has selected your lap. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your permission. Let's get started. I'm planning to use the pattern for the blue Pinafore that I made this past summer and alter it a little bit so it's not so much of a deep V, so it goes up a little bit higher and it's not going to have buttons, can you believe? So I've just found my pattern here and we've got trusty Arya Stark pattern, the only pattern I ever use. You're being really needy today, sir. Do you know? Yeah, so I'm just gonna dig everything out that I need. And we can start cutting out the fabric. This is fine. This doesn't affect my productivity today and my timeline. This is all fine. I decided to cut out the skirt first, which would give me a starting point for matching the print to the bodice. I have a muslin half circle skirt that I use as a pattern, and I placed this on top of the fabric along the folded edge and cut around it to get my front skirt piece. My muslin skirt pattern was too long for this fabric, so I trimmed off a few centimeters after the skirt was cut out. I repeated the process for the back skirt piece, but cut it into two separate pieces after, which is where I'd be adding the zipper. Once I'd found the bodice pattern pieces, I taped on extra paper to the center front and back to alter the neckline a bit higher. In hindsight, I wish I hadn't gone with princess seams and had used darts instead, as I think the print would look nicer that way. If I make another dress like this in the future, I'll probably steer clear of princess seams. Full disclosure, I actually made this bodice really badly once. Because this fabric had a print, it was really easy to see if it didn't line up between panels. You can see it here that the pattern matching between panels is just abysmal. So I've tried to arrange the footage in a "this is what I should have done the first time" order, which will hopefully make it more helpful if you're following along. So what you'll see for the rest of the video is footage from both the first and second times. I first copied my pattern pieces onto parchment paper. This would allow me to see the fabric through the pattern pieces, which would hopefully let me line up the pieces more easily for pattern matching. I also marked the seam allowances on the pattern pieces with a dotted line. Having completed the dress as I'm recording this, I learned that for my fabric, matching up the white horizontal lines was the most important factor in making the print look cohesive between the different panels of fabric, but I'd imagine that would change depending on each different fabric. Some prints won't be noticeable at all, and then pattern matching isn't even an issue. With the new pattern pieces prepared, I cut them out of the fabric one at a time. This would help me to match up the print between the different panels. I started with the center front panel, placing it on the fold of the fabric so that it would line up with the skirt. For the remaining pieces, I placed the pattern piece on top of the previously cut fabric piece and marked certain landmarks, such as the corner of a white square, for example. Then I could line up those marks on the fabric and cut out the next piece. I cut out each piece on a single layer of the fabric, so I wouldn't have to worry about the bottom layer shifting as I cut. Pattern matching is more of a wasteful use of fabric because you end up having to move over to the next repeating section a lot of the time in order to have the print match up. I continued with this for the remainder of the outer bodice pieces, although I realized I could lay the previously cut piece on top of the fabric to be cut and line up the print that way first, then pin the pattern piece on top and cut it out. This was a much quicker method of pattern matching for me. For the lining, I used the mistake version I had cut out before as I wasn't worried about pattern matching for the lining. I wasn't able to perfectly match all of the pattern pieces because I didn't have enough fabric, so I settled with lining up the center and side fronts with each other and center and side backs. Unless you were to see the side seams, it's not a very noticeable flaw in the end. Alright, the bodice pieces are cut out. We've got 4 of each piece so that we can make 2 layers of the bodice so that the top part will be lined. I'm hoping it's not too thick. I think this fabric is thin enough that it should be okay. And then 4 pieces of pocket as well. So yeah, we can start assembling. This clip is from the disaster bodice, but it still shows the necessary assembly steps. I pinned and sewed the pattern matched pieces together, and the mess pieces together as well, so I would have an outer and lining layer. Once all the panels were sewn together for both the outer and lining layers, I clipped and notched the curves, then ironed the seams open. Before sewing the bodice layers together, I had to add the zipper, and before I could do that, I wanted to sew in the skirt. So that meant it was time for pockets. I used my regular method of French seaming the pockets and the side seams into the skirt. Check out my linen dresses video if you'd like a more detailed explanation of that. In short, first you French seam the pocket pieces separately to the skirt pieces, then you French seam the side seam and the outer edge of the pocket closed, joining the 2 pocket layers. After the skirt was done, I sewed it to the bodice with a straight stitch. Then it was time for the zipper. I opted for a regular zipper instead of an invisible one because I think they're a bit sturdier. So first, I pinned and sewed the back seam with right sides together using the longest stitch length on my machine. Next, I pressed open that seam and laid the zipper down in the middle with the right side down, making sure to only pin through one layer of the dress. It can help to put something hard in between the dress layers, even just a piece of cardboard, to keep the bottom layer from getting caught with the pins. When pinning at the waistline, be aware of which way you pin the seam allowances. I would be lining the bodice, so I made sure to fold the seam allowances up towards the bodice so they'd be covered by the lining. Once the zipper is pinned in along both sides, I took it over to my machine to sew it in. I switched out my regular presser foot for a zipper foot, which is narrower and lets you get much closer to the zipper teeth. This came with my machine, which I would imagine is standard with most machines, but they may look slightly different. Mine is a cheapo plastic one. After that, it's just a matter of sewing as usual along the zipper, maintaining an even distance from the zipper for the whole way. Once you reach the bottom of the zipper, keep the needle in the fabric and rotate it 90 degrees. Sew across the bottom, rotate again, and sew up the other side. After that, I used a seam ripper to open the original basted seam over the zipper, and this should leave you with a zipper that is covered by 2 flaps of fabric. Then you can sew a more permanent stitch on the seam below the zipper using a smaller stitch length and back stitching at the ends. Finally, I could sew the bodice layers together. I laid them out flat with right sides together, lining up the seam lines, and pinned and sewed around the edges, leaving the straps and bottom open for now. I then clipped the curves and corners, then turned the dress right side out to iron it. Now it was on to hand sewing. Quite a few things in this dress needed to be finished by hand. First, there was the back seam of the skirt. I folded both edges outward from the seam and tucked the raw edges under and secured them with a whip stitch, trying to make the stitches as small as possible because they'd be seen from the right side of the dress. I was able to continue this stitch up the whole length of the skirt, even under the zipper, because I had a fair amount of seam allowance to work with. However, you could also trim the excess and simply whip stitch around the edges of the zipper instead. For the bodice, I also folded under the raw edges at the bottom of the lining to cover the raw edges where the bodice meets the skirt, and at the zipper edge, and secured everything with a whip stitch. The shoulder seams were sewn by machine by folding over the raw edges on one strap, then sliding the raw edge of the other in the middle and top stitching. Now the only thing left was the hem. I first hung the dress up so the skirt could stretch along the bias, which can leave you with wonky hems on circle skirts if you don't let it stretch. I have a brand new chalk marker that just doesn't work, so I had to use pins to mark where to cut the bottom. I placed my ruler on the floor and just placed pins at the same height every few inches so I'd have a straight line to cut along. You can really see here how much the fabric can stretch out along the bias of a circle skirt, so it's always a good idea to allow that to happen before cutting so it doesn't happen after you've already hemmed the skirt. After the hem was nice and even, I folded up the bottom edge twice and then secured everything with a whip stitch and the dress was complete. Honestly, this dress is just okay. I think it may have been better as a skirt rather than a whole dress. I still wear it a lot, but the pattern matching isn't the best, especially because I didn't have enough fabric. At the very least, it was a learning experience, and I'm still happy I made it. Make sure to watch my previous capsule wardrobe videos and subscribe for more sewing content to come.
The camera loves you, baby. Yeah!